Let's see if YouTube finds it.
And Stephanie, how do you pronounce your last name? Verlaan?
Yeah, that's pretty well right. Verlaan.
Verlaan. Thank you.
Okay, YouTube has found the stream. Twitch has found the stream. Now Facebook is ready to find the stream. Are you ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay.
Okay.
Hit the on the air switch. Is
Yes.
the timer going?
The timer is going.
Okay.
And the light is on.
Okay. Put the clapper in front of your face. When you hit the clapper, you're on the air.
Thanks. Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thank you, Richard. And we thank our friends in WBNY. This is broadcast on WBNY 91.3 FM, Buffalo's original alternative radio station, coming to you from Buff State. So thank you, Buff State. And when I think of thanks, I think of our Indigenous friends and how, despite the fact that we're, first of all, on stolen Indigenous land, all of us, many of, certainly here in Buffalo, we're on Seneca land, Haudenosaunee land, and we think of how, after so much violence and trickery, Indigenous people have been closed into small spaces and so oppressed. And in spite of that, they are full of Thanksgiving, and they start all their events with a Ganonyo that acknowledges all the people who made it possible, that thanks and remembers Mother Earth, the living waters, the plants and of all kinds, nutritional, medicinal, and the trees, and the creatures of all kinds, and so many different elements in our creation and in the heavens, and of course our Creator, and the fact that we have instructions that we should be observing our instructions so that life can continue in this creation. And then they would say Yahweh, and then the people would say no. So Yahweh.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you, too, for coming on. We have a special series of shows tonight. We're observing, both remembering Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and there's all kinds of activity. Right now, we're going to be focusing on nuclear issues. So we're very privileged to have two wonderful guests with us and possibly a third on the way. But we have here virtually Stephanie Verlaan, who is coming from the International Peace Bureau. Welcome, Stephanie. Stephanie, we're so grateful for all the work that you've done, both in Australia and now for Germany, or in Germany. Right now is in New York City. So thank you for coming, in spite of the fact that it's so busy right now there in New York City.
Yeah, it's certainly been a busy last 2 days. Today's actually the second day of the conference. So
oh, boy.
It's been what's happening.
So we'll be talking some more about that. I first also want to introduce Diane DeRigo, who is has a long-standing work on the Nuclear Information and Resource Service, which is a great asset to every community, and especially this community, because we have so much nuclear waste. And she is the Radioactive Waste Program Specialist. Am I saying it right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. And Diane, thank you for all the work you've done for our area and in this area of nuclear waste, because it is huge. And you've done.
You're so welcome.
Well, we're so grateful. So, and we may have Agnes Williams, who is, the coordinator of the Indigenous Women's Initiative, but certainly she has brought Diane and us and me together. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Vicki Ross, board chair now at the Western New York Peace Center. So I'm privileged to be here and very grateful to get into this topic. And before we do, I just want to say, when we think of nuclear issues, I just want to ask each of you to share a value or two that you think of, some kind of value that we need to remember when we think about nuclear issues. So, Stephanie, what would be a value that you think of with nuclear issues? Of really any kind.
The first one that comes to mind would be, it's not so much a value, but like a right, like the right to health.
Sure.
To have a healthy environment free from toxins and things like that. So.
Absolutely. That is absolutely a value. That environmental justice of having that right to health and to a healthy environment is huge. So that's a big value. Thank you for bringing that one. And Diane?
So it's very similar to that, but it's honesty about the dangers of radiation and the real potential for radioactivity to cause all kinds of harm at every level, and that there is no safe level. So whether it's high level, low level, whether it's a huge bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, or whether it's routine releases from bomb-making facilities or radioactive waste dumps like we have in Western New York, I think that as people consider what are we going to do about climate change, we need to take advantage of the forced decisions we have to make, and not concede, not give up our values for health. And nuclear power, nuclear weapons are inextricably linked. And so to hinge our future on nuclear is making climate worse. It's guaranteeing more radioactivity in our environment.
Right.
And it's also, like I said, inextricably linked with weapons and nuclear power. It's all the same fuel chain. The waste is similar. The radioactivity is dangerous.
Absolutely.
So it's actually the knowledge and the fact that radiation causes not only cancer but reduced immunity and other health effects. That's similar to that same value, but a lot more talking.
Sure. Well, actually, you bring out a different. You know what? A lot of times, I'm forever bringing up unarmed truth and unconditional love. So Dr. King said that we, that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. So I want to say, I in holding to that, oftentimes I mention truth and love as the values, and both of those values are really reflecting in that. So what you said about honesty, that truth, that facts, the actual factual information that is known. It's not unknown. We know it. So the truth, and then the love that we love. If we love people and love other people, that the dangers that people are being exposed to when they don't have that right to a healthy environment, when that is not acknowledged and adhered to, so it's very, very, both of them very connected to that and to each other. So thank you for that. So with that, let us dive into, first, I've been very eager to hear the update on what's going on with this, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty review that's going on now, which is the first one since the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons went into effect about over a year ago now. So Stephanie, if things are happening in New York City, what's happening?
Yeah, so I guess I did write down a few of my main observations that I've made. It's only been 2 days, and yesterday I actually missed half of them.
That's all right.
So I tried to do my best to catch up today.
Sure.
But just in general, so amongst all the other civil society representatives that I've spoken to, there's a general feel of very low optimism that there will be any kind of outcome or progress at the end of this month of talks and negotiations. And this is, as you would have guessed, mostly because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And so this is really dominating a lot of the talk. So I was listening to some of the, every ambassador, every delegate has the option to address the conference, and every single person that's in the speech is mentioning the invasion. So it's definitely going to be a key and very dominating topic of the entire talks, and it's really just pushed everyone, all the nuclear weapon states, further away than they already were from the point of where they felt that they could begin to reduce their arsenals. So very pessimistic, but even if there had not been any invasion and we were just continuing on like we already have for the last 50 years, we'll probably be seeing the same kind of trend anyway, because let's be honest, we know that they don't actually want to get rid of them. I listened to, just by chance, I didn't know that it was coming on, but I listened to the Russian ambassador speak, and he just outright denies that Russia did anything. So they claim, or the stance that the Russian government is putting forward is that they're liberating Ukraine, or Ukrainians and Russians that are living in Ukraine from an oppressive government, and they don't recognize that the Zelensky government was legitimately elected. They claim that it was a coup, and this is their justification. And actually, surprisingly, at the end of that speech, there was a lot of clapping in the gallery, which I was very surprised about. So I don't know who was clapping. I don't know. Maybe they were Russian. Maybe they were from Belarus. Maybe, I don't know. But that was just an observation that I made. And yeah, there's just in general an air of pessimism and just kind of defeat. Well, not defeat. Everyone's continuing to plow and to advocate, to lobby their governments, but everybody's doing it with this kind of cynical attitude. And there's this feeling that the TNW is the way to go. I always like to, I know with my friends and my other nerd pals, we kind of, we joke about the NPT, that it kind of seems to be this like tired old man that just doesn't want to do it anymore, is just, running the mill of the same arguments, the same points of conflict that are coming up again. And then the TPNW comes in, and it's this like hot, young, fresh, 22-year-old that's just like, yeah, I'm different, I'm progressive, like I'm colorful, everybody loves me, everybody wants to be a part of me. And this is kind of the vibe. So we're just, everyone's just like, and you see it as well because the civil society turnout is very low. So this is actually the first review conference. So I was at TPNW first meeting of states parties in Vienna back in June. And that was huge. There was every single Tom, Dick and Harry was there. And then, this one, my boss, he was commenting because he's been around the traps for long time. So he's very, very well versed in how these things happen. He's seen everything, and he's just like, this turnout is just low. Nobody sees any point in coming. because we already know what the outcome is going to be, and that there won't be any. So yeah, that's kind of the vibe.
Is it? So I have two questions really. One, I would have thought that with the TPNW, that the signatories, that the non-nuclear countries would be more vehement about the danger that everyone is putting, the whole world in by the nuclear dangers, and that there would be more attention and credence given to that, because it's been deemed illegal. So is it that that group is less powerful than the other group, than the NPT group?
I wouldn't say less powerful, but there's this matter of the P5.
What's P5?
P5 Sorry, what
is
P5?
it? Yeah.
Say what P5 is for people.
Right.
Okay, so the P5 is basically the permanent 5 members that sit on the UN Security Council, which also happen to be the legal possessors of nuclear weapons. So this is Russia, China, the US, the UK, and France.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, like we know also that Israel, North Korea, and potentially
India,
there's a few others
right?
that are illegal, but they don't. Yeah, India, Pakistan. That's right. They also possess them, but they don't sit on the P5 because their possession is considered illegal.
Right.
Anyway, so but the P5, they control the Conference of Disarmament, and so it's kind of
and they can veto everything, right? They can veto everything.
Exactly, and this is legal under it's everything is perfectly legal under the framework of the NPT, and I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, I have a good. I'd love to hear, because Diane was just starting on that point of the similarities of nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And so if you would talk a little bit about that, and then between the two of you about, how many countries have nuclear power also, so that if we count them in, where does that put us? So, Diane?
You know what? I don't know that off the top of my head.
It's not it's something to think about, but
so
how are they connected?
Well, in order to make nuclear power and in order to make nuclear weapons, first you have to mine uranium from the ground. Mm-hmm. This is most often done on indigenous lands throughout the world, in Australia and Western North America, in Africa, and every continent. And so the mining of uranium, whether it's surface mining or underground mining or in situ leachate, where they inject chemicals into the ground and dissolve it and extract the uranium out, and then do a legal analysis to justify that the amount of chemicals left in the water is okay. Mm-hmm. In any case, all of uranium mining is a devastation of the earth, and there's no real requirement to fully clean it up or isolate that waste. It's the least regulated waste. Wow. So that's when you get the uranium out. Mm-hmm. Then you've got there are other elements besides uranium. So you got to try to separate out the uranium. That's done at mills. And then they try to get more of the uranium-235 atoms. There are uranium-238 atoms and 234 and 239, but the 235s are the ones that they need for nuclear power and weapons to sustain the chain reaction. So then the uranium is moved to a mill and then to a conversion facility where they convert it into a gas, and then they concentrate the U-235, and they're moving this on roads, rails, and waterways,
Right.
spreading radioactivity, making waste at every step of the way, causing worker exposure,
Right.
and causing and leaving contamination of air, water, soil, and crops, as well as actual waste that needs to be isolated generally pretty much forever because it's so long lasting. So once the uranium-235 is concentrated, then it goes to a fabrication facility where they make fuel, and they make fuel specific to the nuclear weapons reactor or the nuclear power reactors. Those are very messy facilities. And then that fuel goes into the core of a reactor. And then if it's a power reactor, they want to split as many of those uraniums as they can to heat the water and turn the turbines and make electricity. Because when you split the uranium, it gives off binding energy, intense binding energy that heats the water, turns the turbines, and makes electricity. What also happens, though, in both reactor and nuclear power and weapons reactors is that uranium-235 atoms can be bombarded with a neutron, and rather than splitting and giving off its binding energy, it absorbs the neutrons, gives off some other particles, and forms plutonium. So then that plutonium is what's used to make weapons. So you get that plutonium formed both in the reactor, nuclear power reactor cores, and in the weapons reactor cores.
Oh.
The goal of it in the reactor core is to get as much plutonium as they can, and then they stop and they take it out, and then they chop it up and they dissolve it in chemicals and extract the plutonium and make the weapons. And make the weapons, that's another bunch of steps.
Right.
If you're doing nuclear power, you have it in the core. So in Western New York, our closest reactors are Gunay, just north of Rochester. We've got Beaver Valley, south of Erie. We've got a whole lot of nuclear reactors on the north shore of the Great Lakes in Canada.
Yep.
And then we've got 3 of them up north of Syracuse and Oswego.
Right. Oswego, I was thinking about.
And then we've got the 3 that are closed down by New York City. So what happens in those facilities is that we've got the fuel rods, and the uraniums are bombarded with neutrons. They split, form other radioactive elements. So the fuel, the high-level waste that's formed from, whether it's a nuclear power reactor or a weapons reactor, you still have all of this radioactive waste that forms.
Right.
And that waste stays dangerous for literally millions of years. And for example, here's one example. When the uranium splits, it forms cesiums, strontiums, iodines. Strontium is a bone seeker, so if it gets into the environment, it gets into our bones and teeth and can cause bone cancer and leukemia. And then cesium, which is a muscle seeker, so it goes to the heart, and it can cause heart problems, and it can cause other health issues. And iodine, as everybody knows, goes to the thyroid. There are iodines that are used in medicine. Radioiodine is very short lasting. It stays radioactive for a few hours or days. But there are a bunch of iodines. Like I said, there's all those different uraniums, 235, 238,
Right.
et cetera. So iodine-129 has a 17 million year half-life. It's dangerous for 170 to 340 million years. So it's in the environment. So in Western New York, we actually have, you can measure iodine-129 from the reprocessing of irradiated fuel of high-level weapons and power waste. South of Buffalo, we have a site that is closed now, and
You're talking West Valley.
Cleaned up. West Valley nuclear site, and it brought in the weapons fuel from the N reactor in Washington at Hanford, and it reprocessed that. It brought in Indian Point fuel. It brought in fuel from Gunay. Waste from power and weapons was chopped up and dissolved in chemicals, and because it was the fuel was opened up, that radioactivity got blown around into the Western New York region. And University of Rochester researchers did find this long-lasting iodine around our region, which is not seen around other weapon sites that don't do reprocessing, or other reactors where they do reprocessing. That's where it happens. So so we're talking about similar messes from power and weapons, and also using one to justify the other politically.
So, and I know we're going to get into West Valley some more in a little bit. I just want to ask you, so in terms of the danger of nuclear explosions or nuclear exposure, or especially in any kind of a war zone, or even if it becomes a war zone, if some nuclear reactor that somebody, flies a drone into it, or a bunch of drones into it, and they all explode in there, what does that mean for the host country with the power? Or the waste, or a pile of waste for that matter? Or are those...
I can speak to that, but Stephanie, did you want to give your response first?
Response?
She's just unmuted.
No, I'm actually just in awe of
Yeah, see, Diane knows all her stuff. I mean, she got all the elements and all
I'm just so impressed.
Very interesting.
So I don't have any response, but I would like to hear, how they justify, producing all this waste that's going to be around for millions of years.
Denial. Denial.
But it's science. I know this is the same thing that they say about climate. Like, I get it, I know, but
Okay, so it is really kind of exciting to understand and to think about nuclear physics and how the radionuclides form other radionuclides, how they decay. One time I tried to calculate the amount of radioactivity in the Ginna nuclear power reactor fuel pool, because the fuel stays in the core for maybe 2, 3, 4 years. It becomes millions of times more radioactive in the core, and then it goes into a fuel pool. And then the radioactivity decays into other radioactive elements that decay into other ones. And it's actually really fascinating and mentally exhilarating to understand what's going on. And I can get it.
Can I just ask one, where is that? The Ginna one?
Ginna is one of the nuclear power reactors in New York. It's north of Rochester. It's on Lake Ontario. It's one of the oldest reactors in the country. So at one point, and at every nuclear power reactor, we have all of the fuel that's ever used to make electricity sits in either a pool at the reactor site, a 40-foot deep pool, or if it's the pools got all filled up and then they started taking the older fuel and putting it into dry storage in big concrete cylinders on the pad. So at most nuclear reactors in the world, the waste is sitting at the reactor sites. So when you get a nuclear reactor, you are basically getting a nuclear waste site, whether you like it or not. So when they talk about new reactors and small reactors and reactors to deal with climate change, what we are committing to is more unsolvable waste.
Right.
But your question was, I think you were.
My question was the danger in nuclear weapon sites, nuclear waste sites, and nuclear power sites. The danger to the public. Yeah.
There is no safe level of ionizing radioactivity.
Right.
Any amount can initiate negative health effects. The government long ago decided that they were only going to look at cancer, which is pretty significant. So our radiation standards that legalize and justify contamination of workers and the public and the environment are based on the assumption that radiation causes cancer and it's a set amount of cancer. the reality is that it causes a lot more in little girls, in children, in females than in men, that radiation, every amount of radiation can cause cancer, can initiate other very serious health problems, heart disease, reduced immunity. So that means greater susceptibility to other diseases. And what are we trying to do now? Build our immunity to avoid COVID and everything else.
Right.
So it also causes birth defects. A lot of the babies that are affected, though, don't come to term because the body doesn't want to have damaged progeny.
Right.
So, but radiation causes many things, including cancer, and any amount can initiate. There's a set amount that can initiate cataracts in the eyes. So we have naturally occurring radioactivity in our background from the sun, from the granite. We have radioactivity around us. However, when we dig into the earth and we pull out the uranium and dissolve it in chemicals and extract it and concentrate the 235s and have all the so-called depleted uraniums left,
So-called.
we are increasing the amount of radioactivity in the environment. And we do not, some of this radioactivity is short lasting. The stuff they use in medicine and research is generally short lasting, but the stuff that comes from nuclear power and weapons it's both short lasting and very long lasting. So when we make plutonium, it has a 24,000 year half-life. So you multiply by 10 or 20, so you get 250,000 to 500,000 years danger from plutonium. Plutonium is one of the most deadly substances on Earth. A very small amount can initiate cancer. And so there's no safe level. What the industry, what the government try to do is justify the additional contamination that is inevitably generated from producing nuclear power and weapons by saying, oh, it's only a fraction of background. Well, how many fractions of background when background is not safe to begin with? We can't scrub the rocks or not have the sun. We have some exposures to radioactivity that we cannot avoid. So we have existing risks, but adding to those risks unnecessarily when we have solar power and we have wind power and we have increased battery power, and we don't want to put all this energy into nuclear weapons and making the world unstable. So we can and we should, it's totally logical that we move away from both nuclear power and weapons, but it's a tall order. You were talking about how people felt defeated at the UN. Well, I feel defeated when I go to Congress. Senator Manchin, who we hear has just supposedly agreed to to a bill with our Senator Schumer on climate and other issues. The safe energy alternatives don't begin to kick in until after major subsidies to oil and gas drilling and $53 billion subsidy to existing old nuclear reactors that ought to shut down anyway.
Oh my God.
That's in that damn bill. I mean, we need to get that out of there is what we need to do. We don't want to necessarily stop the bill, but Schumer needs to get that out. And they just want to get that through so we've got something to show for.
So one thing I want to get back to, because I want to say when I asked my question, it's so interesting to me that all of the dangers you're mentioning were very real and present dangers when nothing has gone wrong. So, or just the very existence, because what I was thinking. What I was thinking of, what I was really asking about, not that I'm very glad to have that answer. I'm very sorry what the answer is, but I was thinking about explosions. So you didn't even get into that. It's like without any explosions, without any, detonating anything or anything going wrong, all those things are going on with the waste and the presence.
Routine releases from the entire nuclear fuel chain are significant dangers. And then add to it Fukushima or 3 Mile Island or
a nuclear bomb.
Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and on the thousands, hundreds, however many bombs I don't even like to call them bomb tests because they're just detonations.
Right,
They're
right.
bombing us
Right.
throughout the world, and we've increased the amount of carcinogens in our environment. And after a year, they assume that it's natural background or that it's background. So the exposures, the additional radioactivity. When I started this job a while back, the general understanding was there were about 80 milligrams a year was the background radiation. Now they're saying it's 300, 600. They just increase it all the time.
I'm saying it's normal to have all that, they're saying. They're claiming.
Right.
Right. So, wow.
So Diane,
go ahead, Stephanie.
I just wanted to ask a question to Diane about the nuclear waste. So I don't know, can you give like an indication in size of like how like when the nuclear waste comes, like how big is it, sort of thing?
Sure.
And what does it look like? And then like a proportion of just like some waste that's the size of a fist, it, you know, the radiation spreads for this many kilometers sort of thing. So, because it also helpful for me.
There are all kinds of waste that are generated. The buildings themselves become waste.
Right.
All the land becomes contaminated at a nuclear site, whether it's weapons or power. That you cannot isolate this stuff. It's radioactive versions of elements that we already have. So, you know, we have iodine that's not radioactive. This is radioactive iodine. So for nuclear power, well, the first part of it, the mining and milling, there are wastes that are piled up behind dams. It's like a sludge from the milling of uranium. And in 1979, actually the worst nuclear accident in this country took place. The Rio Puerco River was contaminated with a dam break at Church Rock, New Mexico on Navajo land. And they've never cleaned that up. And that radioactivity spread down the river through New Mexico into Arizona, into Nevada. And it has never been cleaned up, and animals died. People had ailments all along. This happened in 1979. So it's not real visible. However, for the nuclear power part of it, I could describe that a little simpler for me because it's what I focus on.
Right.
You have the uranium, it's concentrated. It's converted to a gas and put through miles of tubes and an enrichment facility. And now there's a circular, it's another kind of enrichment that's done in New Mexico. Anyway, they separate out the U-235s and then they form it into little pellets. So each pellet is about the size of the tip of your finger. And these pellets are stacked into 10 to 14 foot long, pretty much pencil thin or finger thin rods. There's a couple hundred of these rods per assembly. So then the assembly is held together with, it's bound together with metal things. And so it's tall, and you've got a couple hundred of these assemblies that go into the core of a nuclear reactor. So this is a reactor core, and water is circulating around to moderate the neutrons and the heat. And so then neutrons are sent in, and then they start bombarding the uraniums. In just about 2, 3, 4 years, that fuel, those assemblies, they still look the same, but they are now millions of times more radioactive because of all the fission products, the cesiums and the strontiums and the plutoniums and the iodines that have formed, and there are hundreds of these elements. So we've got these assemblies. And during the dawn of the nuclear age, they just considered, well, this is waste. They put it into the fuel pools, and they expected that someday they'd reprocess them and they'd get the uranium that was left over out, and they weren't thinking about the waste. So we've got the assemblies. They go into the fuel pools then, where they need to be stored for at least, it depends how radioactive they are. It could be anywhere from 3 years to 20 years that it needs to be stored underwater. Once it's cooled down some radioactively and thermally, it's still deadly. It still gives a lethal dose in just a few minutes, unshielded. So it's then when the pools got all full around the country, they move those assemblies out of the pools and put them into dry storage canisters. And so there's a whole debate that goes on now about the integrity of those canisters, and the canisters are stored basically at every reactor site.
Right.
What the government wants to do now, what the nuclear industry wants to do, is pretend this isn't a problem, find a place somewhere to send it, put it on the roads and rails and send it. This is the irradiated fuel now. Send it on the roads and rails to some place away, usually native land or Hispanic land or poor communities. So that's a fight that we have in our hands right now, is to not have this stuff travel on the roads and rails and waterways to there's no permanent way to isolate it. They picked a place in Nevada on Western Shoshone land. The government did in 1987. It was called the Screw Nevada Bill, and it was to make Yucca Mountain be the dump, but that site could not isolate it. It had earthquakes and volcanoes and all kinds of technical and political challenges, and under Obama it was canceled. So the irradiated fuel now, it's in the form of these assemblies, and it sits at mostly at reactor sites. And what we want to prevent is having this very material be moving on our roads and rails routinely. It would take 40 years to move all of it to one place. And we do have to think about it because sea level rise is going to encroach on reactors.
And I just want to mention that we have that coming over the Peace Bridge. And some people have heard this on our show, or some maybe haven't, but that we have liquid nuclear waste coming over the Peace Bridge from Canada, all going all the way down to South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Yep. And on public, highways and byways, across rivers and streams and aquifers, and it is not regulated. If they're sitting in traffic, it's it could be exposing people to radiation. And there's also solid nuclear waste that also comes over in the same way and goes to Tennessee. So we actually have a vigil every Friday from 2 to 3 at Vermont and Bust-I here in Buffalo, where people are protesting that, to just even make people aware, that there's nuclear waste and liquid nuclear waste, which if that fell into it somehow fell into the Great Lakes, that is 20% of the world's fresh water supply that could be contaminated with nuclear waste.
So the other, just the fuel rods, the assemblies, or irradiated fuel as we call it, spent fuel or used fuel as the industry likes to call it, that is high-level waste. And according to U.S. definition, everything else is, quote, low-level waste, even though some low-level waste could give a lethal dose unshielded in 15 to 20 minutes. And that's, so when you've got the same plutonium atom that's in that fuel rod, it's high level waste. There are pinhole pricks and cracks in the cladding of those rods. That stuff leaks into the water, and then the water gets filtered, and those filters and sludges are, quote, low-level waste. But that same plutonium atom is high-level waste in the rod. It's low-level waste in the filter. And then if it doesn't get caught by the filter and it gets out into the water, which some of it does, it becomes a routine release. And then it's a routine release, and it gets out into the environment.
So
and
I want to
not just plutonium, it's all of but to give you an idea of what it looks like, the rods, and then it's filters, and then there's other materials in the building material that is the waste.
So let's move into, I know this is the part that you're especially excited about talking about, Diane, which you just have such a wealth of knowledge and very, into the very scientific detail. But, that we have a call of action here that you wanted to make for West Valley. So you've said a little bit about what it is, what West Valley is. And of course, I want to just say, as you did, and as just to emphasize what, Agnes Williams is always talking about, and you often, anyone who's talking really, and who is aware that our indigenous friends are at every stop of that nuclear chain. And so they get exposed. And Agnes is always saying that we have so much nuclear waste here in Western New York. It's one of the reasons why we have Roswell Cancer Institute, because there's just so much cancer around here and so much pollution that is West Valley, that was up around and of course, so that's the Cattaraugus Reservation, and also around the Tonawanda Reservation and all around Niagara Falls. There's just a lot of it. But let's talk about West Valley, which is now, so give us an update on West Valley.
So the West Valley site is the only place in the U.S. where that high-level waste, the irradiated fuel, was actually reprocessed. So they brought it in from the reactors in the 60s and 70s, and they dissolved it in acids and extracted uranium and plutonium that went into the Department of Energy weapons program. And then liquid and sludge were left in tanks in the ground. And then in the 80s to 90s, that liquid was converted into a solid, and it's stored there, but there's still sludge in the tanks, and we have burial grounds. So this is upstream and upwind of Buffalo and Western New York. I mean, depending how the wind blows, it's upwind of the whole state, Canada, et cetera. So it's really good that the Department of Energy, the U.S. federal government, and New York State are in the process of trying to clean this place up. The danger is that they're not going to really clean it up, that they're going to try to rationalize leaving it there. And right now, there has been an ongoing effort to remove all the surface buildings. There's still a huge amount of radioactivity underground in burial grounds, in tanks, in miles of pipe below the reprocessing building. So what is about to be demolished, perhaps as soon as the fall of 2022, is the building where the reprocessing took place. So they brought the fuel rods in, chopped them up, dissolved them, highest worker exposures in the country, highest radioactive water in Cattaraugus Creek downstream of this site during reprocessing. To their credit, and I have to really thank the workers at the West Valley site for the enormous effort and risk that they're taking to clean this place up. So there's been a lot of effort trying to get rid of the to clean out, but now it's time to demolish the building. And we have called for, organizations across it called for enclosing it under some kind of an enclosure so that when the demolition takes place, that plutonium that's left that they couldn't get cleaning out meticulously doesn't spread around Western New York. So we don't repeat what happened with the iodine spreading all over Western New York and have whatever's left. So we want it enclosed. We want to have real-time monitoring and reporting off-site to find out what's getting off-site, if and what is getting off-site. It's expensive, but we're talking about potentially permanent contamination of the area. So
including the Great
call
Lakes.
right now is for the governor. Yes, and this is downstream. The water from the site is drained through the Cattaraugus into Lake Erie, and then below that, downstream, is where the intakes are for the Western New York drinking water, Erie County drinking water supply. So what we're doing is calling on Governor Hochul and Lieutenant Governor Delgado and the leadership in the New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate to use whatever abilities they have, whatever persuasion they have, to convince the Department of Energy, as they demolish this building, to do it undercover and to monitor around it.
Right.
So at this point, we ask people to contact our governor and our elected officials, state officials, federal as well, but we've been working on the federal for years, and we really need New Yorkers to stand up and be assertive and prevent potential really permanent contamination.
Right. It's so serious a danger. And I know this is not a new initiative. This is just something for the past. It's really been a continuation. It's just
an ongoing effort.
Right.
I mean, even once these buildings are down, there was a building that was taken down around 2018 or 19, and there was radioactivity detected on one of the off-site there are some monitors now, but they only collect the samples every few weeks or months. So they did detect that during the demolition of one of the other buildings, that there was radioactivity off-site.
Oh,
but
boy.
no, it's not above the legal level, so we don't worry about it. And, legal levels are not the safe levels because there is no safe level.
Right. Well, we have a lot of work to do.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie. Yep. Well, I want to say we have about a little 7, 8 minutes left. So go ahead, please.
Okay. I just have another question for you, Diane. Another nerd one. And I don't know if I'm completely crazy, but if water becomes contaminated with nuclear waste or radiation or anything, if that water then evaporates and it goes, into the clouds, does that take it with it, or does it kind of become separated?
Some stays in the precipitate. Whatever's left over, there could be a solid with radioactivity, but some of the radioactivity is in the form of gases. So it could go up into the clouds with the evaporate.
So both.
So evaporating it does not mean that it disappears. It is somewhere. That's the problem with radioactive elements, which makes them a bit different from some chemicals. Some chemicals with some amount of energy and effort, you can actually break them down and make them into less dangerous pieces. But radioactive elements are radioactive until they decide to decay down into another element and eventually to a non-radioactive form. So the water, it's very, very hard and expensive to filter and clean water. I mean, there are efforts to clean water that has been contaminated, and you can get some of the radioactivity filtered out, but certainly not all of it. And there will be precipitates, there will be hydrogen, tritium is a radioactive form of hydrogen. So if you have a water molecule that's H2O and one or two of those hydrogens is tritium, it's radioactive water. You can't really separate that from the other water. You can, but it's a super expensive prospect that has never been done that I know of.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, it just makes it distribute even more. The more it just keeps going. It doesn't,
that's
it's
the problem with the nuclear power and weapons fuel chain is that we are unleashing, the Pandora's box. It's getting out and you cannot put it back in.
Right.
And once it's out,
Right. Millions. So you said how many, half a million years or something
like that? For plutonium-239,
it depends on the one.
The danger is 250,000 to 500,000 years. People say 10 or 20 half-lives is the hazardous time for various elements. So strontium-90, it's got about 28-year half-life, so it's dangerous for 280 to 360 years. And that's what's buried. That's what's buried at West Valley. A lot of that. That's what's migrating, and they've built a filter wall to filter the radioactivity that's migrating from West Valley into the creeks, into the lake, into the Great Lakes. And so we're filtering out some of the strontium. Are we getting out all of the plutonium, americium, neptunium, cesium? I mean, there are hundreds of radionuclides, and we focus on some, but not all.
So I just want to remind people that if you don't know how to get in touch with the governor, or our elected officials, you can go on WNYPC.org, the Western New York Peace Center website, and there's organizing in Western New York, and there's a part for the contact info for our public officials. People are welcome to look at that. And of course, the NIRS website is NIRS.org. Yep, just like the Peace Center. So, those are places for more information. And I'm sorry that Agnes wasn't able to join us. And we didn't say much about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just people know that devastation. We can't, never again is never again. But instead, we have it coming, and assaulting people even when there isn't a disaster or some explosion, right? That's what in so many ways you've shared. I just want to say we only have 2 more minutes, so I want to give you each a chance to just have your last thought that you want to tell people, just a sentence or two. So, Stephanie, we'll start with you. And
I was just thinking of the work that you do, Diane, and it's very, and then I was also thinking about all the other people who work in different kinds of jobs that's dealing with these massive existential threats to our safety, our health, the very existence of humans, nuclear,
right,
whatever, the risk of famine, climate change, all these things. And what I'd be interested to know from you actually is, how do you not get very depressed when the very
do get
science of the
depressed.
reality, but you keep coming to work still every day, and you keep doing these actions and pushing and lobbying, and you don't give up, and
because we can win. We've had many victories. How many years did it take to get the treaty on the prohibition on nuclear weapons passed?
Right.
I mean, that was a totally uphill battle, and people worked focused on that for decades. And I think that the dumps we prevent, the weapons we prevent, the new reactors that we prevent is saving so much of our future. Right. And we really can't afford to leave it, because the consequences are somewhat unthinkable, and they're also insidious. You'll never really know. So thanks for having us together here to commemorate Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and the positive, the treaty on the prevention of nuclear weapons, and the positive possibilities that we have to make the cleanup safer in our own area. The West Valley.
We so need to do it. I can't thank you both enough. You've offered so much insight, wisdom, inspiration. Both of you are very grateful. So we have a lot of work to do, but we have to do it for the 7th generation. We'll continue doing it. Thank you so much, more than I can say. And we'll keep right on, and we're going to get there. So this is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love. Thank you so